So the second part of that, once people start actually using the hamstrings and pulling that heel up towards the butt when they're running, a lot of times they don't release the calf. So here, through your initial pull, as soon as that foot's off the ground, you want that foot to be as relaxed as possible. I mean, if you're running for 30 minutes and you keep your calves flexed the whole time, that's a lot of work. All right, so talking about running, there's a lot to be said when it comes to people's running form. I'm just gonna talk about two things today. Just kind of breaking down the gait a little bit, and one of the reasons why your calves might be getting sore if you've changed your running form recently. So the first thing I see a lot when people are just kind of like running on a treadmill, I kind of call it like shuffle running. It's like their feet aren't really getting far off the treadmill and they're getting very little hamstring engagement. So it's just like this really low pull and just getting that foot out in front of them, and it's a very flat movement through the feet. So that like really low leg swing coming through your initial pull, a lot of people can be confused thinking that that's like an efficient stride just because they tend to land really smoothly. But it's actually a very inefficient way to run, and it can definitely lead to some injuries. So the most obvious thing, if people's toes or their toenails are bleeding, or like your toes hurt after you running, that's because your feet are sliding into the front of your shoes, which shouldn't be happening. Your foot should always be landing under your center of mass. Basically, it should be landing underneath your hip each time. So if you're coming through your initial pull with like this really low swing and you're not getting that heel up very much, the leg's gonna end up swinging out in front of you, landing into the heel, and you'll be sliding over it. So just because it feels very smooth going heel to toe doesn't mean it's good for you. So anytime you have something landing in front of a body in motion, that thing is going to slow down the body in motion. It's like very basic physics. But beyond that, if your foot's landing out in front of you, you're putting on a brake, and then your toes are going to slide into the front of your shoes. So the one caveat to that is people who do a lot of trail running, there just tends to be a ton of vertical in any sort of trail run you do, so it's going to be a lot of downhill, and that downhill, it's hard to avoid the toes slamming into the front of your shoes. But if you're just out road running, your toes should not be slamming into the front of your shoes. So the other reason I try to get people out of like that low swing is because you're just not utilizing your glutes and hamstrings. You're asking your hip flexors and your quads to do like the lion's share of the work when you're running. It's fine to use your quads and hip flexors, but like this entire posterior chain is a much stronger complex than your quad and hip flexor complex is. So in a second, I'll go over how to kind of utilize the glutes and hamstrings more. But another thing that happens when you're coming through the pull like this, if you're just pulling that leg out in front of you, what's happening? You're pulling the knee forward and then you're straightening the knee. So pulling the knee in front, that's pulling your knee to flexion. You're asking your hip flexors to pull you forward, and then to extend the leg, you're asking your quads to engage. So all the way through that pull, you're just asking all the muscles on the front side of your body to work, and you're not utilizing anything on the posterior chain. So when I'm trying to get people out of that low swing and get them to a more sort of active hamstring movement, so we're pulling that heel up towards the butt, get them kind of running the wheel. So one of the analogies I use a lot when I'm trying to teach people this is the idea of running a wheel. As that foot comes down, tap it down, pull the heel up to the butt as the knee is coming forward, and they end up kind of running in a wheel or a circular motion versus this really long sort of pendulum movement that people are doing when they're kind of like shuffle running. So for some people, just switching the idea of how they're coming through that initial pull, that's enough to get them to start using the glutes and hamstrings. So a lot of times if people are just pulling through with their knee, if you think about pulling the knee up in front of you to get to this figure 4 position, if you're thinking about pulling the knee up, you're asking the hip flexors to work. If starting your initial pull, you think about pulling the heel up to your butt, to get to that position, you're utilizing the hamstrings. In both cases, you're gonna finish here. Back from extension, I pull the knee up, boom, use the hip flexors, pull the heel to the butt. I get to the same exact position, but I'm using the posterior chain instead of asking the hip flexors to do that job. So a lot of times when people are changing their running form, like one of my big cues for them is like pull the heels, pull the heels, pull the heels. As soon as your foot touches down, you're trying to pull that heel up off the ground again. Again, if you're running at a casual pace, you're not going to be pulling all the way up to your butt and not at that speed. That's more of like a sprint speed, but still, your foot touches down, you're still pulling that heel up. You're just running a smaller wheel. Sprinting, you're running a much bigger wheel, and the intensity of that pull is a lot stronger. So the second part of that, once people start actually using the hamstrings and pulling that heel up towards the butt when they're running, a lot of times they don't release the calf. So here, through your initial pull, as soon as that foot's off the ground, you want that foot to be as relaxed as possible. right? Well, when that leg's in the air, there's no need for these muscles to be engaged. That's just wasted energy. And anyone who's done any sort of endurance running just knows that running is essentially just a battle of energy conservation. If you're keeping your calves flexed on every single pull, that's a ton of energy you're wasting, and it's gonna have you land in a bad position. So from this pull, if you keep the calves engaged and keep that foot dorsiflexed as you pull through, instead of the foot dropping down into a good forefoot or midfoot position, the calf's gonna be dorsiflexed, so here you go, landing into the heel, even if it's pretty much under your hip. So even if you're still landing under your center of gravity and your center of mass, if you're landing in the heel, that's a lot of impact with the bones in your body that you don't really want there. So from this position, once the foot's up off the ground, your foot should be totally relaxed. So as you come through that pull, the toe's almost pointed down towards the ground, and you kind of land into a midfoot, forefoot position. That way, once you touch down, the heel is just tapping down, and then you're pulling that foot back up again. So a lot of times when people sort of change their form and start doing more of a pulling movement versus that swing, their calves will get really sore, and that's for two reasons. One, you're no longer landing into your heel, so every time you land midfoot or forefoot, you're asking your calf to do some of that absorption on each step. The other reason, I mean, if you're running for 30 minutes and you keep your calves flexed the whole time, that's a lot of work. That's a big, long isometric hold for your calves. So one of the things I do to help people train that, just get to that figure four position and make sure the calf is relaxed. Tap the foot down, and people just need to get the idea of as soon as the foot comes up off the ground, relax that calf. So if you're considering changing your running form, or I feel like anyone should just like videotape themselves running. I feel like you learn more in an hour of video analysis than you do in months of just running and kind of guessing what your body's doing. Videotape yourself running, take a look at it, see if you're doing that low shuffle, swing through each time, check your landing gait, see where that's coming down, then also try to check if you do have a good pull, where's your foot landing in relationship to the hips, and finally, are you releasing the calf or is the calf staying flexed, forcing the foot to be dorsiflexed the whole time? Plenty more to talk about when it comes to running, but that's probably a good place to start.